I have no name or location to give. I had been a normal person who lived a normal but otherwise productive life. In my eyes, there was no further merit to being a member of society than simply doing the right thing, being a decent person, staying out of conflict. Most of you reading this are in the overwhelming category of people who follow these unspoken rules of society without thinking about it too much. Most of us can be rude or have our flaws, but typically we're not actively wanting to seek conflict. A smaller selection of people go out of their way to adopt these traits to the point of hardly perpetuating negativity in their lives, and an even smaller fraction devote a lifestyle for the sake of helping others. We naturally gravitate towards the latter types, people who we cannot imagine living without, whose love and overwhelming selflessness can almost feel intoxicating. We can all think of someone like this and how they'd never hurt a fly, much less start conflict with anyone. Yet they become a target, all the same. As of writing, I'm the first documented survivor of the Morenda Script. I lived in an unremarkable town where our biggest export was coal. Hardly anyone had aspirations, and those who did left as soon as they found better opportunities elsewhere. It wasn't a dying town, but it was doomed to hopelessness unless our mayor welcomed new industries in the oncoming years of rapid growth everywhere else surrounding us. I was head of a small non-profit that combated employment, homelessness, and addiction within our community. It was extremely exhausting work that I questioned monthly if it was something that I could do for the rest of my life. But every so often I'd be reminded by one of our former clients that I couldn't see myself doing anything else with the same level of personal conviction. No matter its direct impact on my income and mental health, it was something I'd be constantly told by friends and family that mattered more than I made it out to be. I let it all not get to my head, but it did feel nice knowing that my work was seen as a net positive to our community. This was what made me a target of the Morenda Script. A monotheistic cult of zealots with a twisted interpretation of a single god who they call the entirety. According to their scripture, this was the true form of God, a being with no indifference to good and evil in humans, as that was what was derived from its image. This was a philosophy that openly embraced all aspects of what makes us human, good and bad. What made it entirely different from other religions that practiced something similar, however, was the contents of the script itself. The concept of an ideology or philosophy that depicted opposing forces as part of the same cycle is not unheard of, yin and yang serving as a strong example. The name Morenda Script comes from a set of scriptures that are said to have been written by a monk of unknown origin who kidnapped a benevolent advisor of a high-ranking governor in the Khwarezmian Empire, flaying him alive. It is said in the script that this act served as a contentious reminder to the entirety that humanity could only ever act upon the limits of its creator, and to seek those limits was the truest justification of our purpose in this life. I researched this information for myself after my escape, and if true, that advisor's death may have influenced the events that led to the infamous execution of the Mongol caravan of 1218, which resulted in the complete and utter annihilation of that same empire in one of the bloodiest military campaigns in history. This would make the Morenda Script one of the most successfully hidden organizations from human record, with little information on just how much they influenced the events of the world throughout their existence. I was kidnapped in my own office by these people, having disguised themselves as clients for nearly a year. I was taken to an abandoned warehouse and handcuffed alongside 3 other strangers to a thick wooden beam. In a final cruel act, we were told everything, down to how we would die. We all pleaded for our lives, which only served to entertain these fanatics. They set fire to the entire warehouse with us trapped inside. We burned horrendously, helpless, as the building collapsed around us. In what only could be described as a miracle, part of the collapsed roof contained trapped rainwater from the night before, which landed directly onto me right before it gave way. It was not nearly enough to put the fire out, but it kept me soaked and less susceptible to the fatal burns the other three suffered. I survived long enough to feel the weakened support beam give in to the flames and made my escape while nearly severing my tongue from the blinding pain, forcing myself to remain quiet in case these cultists were still watching over the building. I don't know if I would call it luck, but I managed to escape through a nearby thicket without being noticed, my burns needing immediate attention, as no amount of adrenaline was able to prevent my attempts to scream, to have any noise be pushed out of my scorched throat. I fainted once I made it out from the other side near a hiking trail. Waking up in a hospital bed, I was told that I had been spotted, and an ambulance was called shortly before my collapse. The burns were severe enough to permanently disfigure my body, but I survived to tell authorities what had happened. What seemed like hours of investigation concluded with no possible leads, as absolutely no evidence was left at the burned house. I pleaded with them to believe me, to believe the words of the killers who were so confident in leaving no evidence that they'd tell us everything before we died. The more I told them, however, the less inclined they were to believe my rambling, narrowing their case down to cartel activity that surged nearby. The worst part was that I couldn't fault them, as the motives of this group were unclear even for me at the time. What I learned that night was that the Morenda Script only seeks one type of victim: people who follow the aforementioned rules of society to the highest degree. In other words, they single out good people to butcher ritualistically. They don't care about your money or your connections, only your accomplishments. The more selfless acts you've done to help others, the higher up you'll be on their list. And they won't just kill you. The purpose of your death by this cult is to be sent back to the entirety with of life, of love, and hatred in balance. Those who only knew love in their lives would consequently be tortured the most under the watchful eye of their creator, instilling a seed of unfathomable hatred towards the world and its God who let it all happen to balance out a lifetime of good deeds. That was why they explained everything to us before our slow, agonizing deaths. It was to ensure our final thoughts be that of worldly betrayal and incomprehensible anger, to break us into believing that abstaining from the malice that shaped our humanity was an act punishable by the Creator whose complete image we rejected. Calling them evil is not enough. This is an organization whose members see evil as a necessity to the human experience, that denying its purpose would be to spit at their complete, perfect image of God. The fanatics of this group have been brainwashed to believe their purpose was to bring a necessary balance to the world, that to deny their lust for bloodshed would be to deny their Creator who filled their minds with malice for a purpose, not as an obstacle to overcome. I cannot think of a more terrifying human than one who justifies their sins with divine right. Still fearing for my life, I discharged myself from the hospital the moment I felt like I could walk, making my way back home to prepare myself for searching everything that was related to the Morenda Script. There was no doubt these fanatics would have some semblance of knowing I was still alive before the cindered house became taped off by police. And even returning to my home was a risky decision. Even so, I wanted to know the truth before my life ended. I wanted to share that truth with the world now that I lost everything. It took all that remained in my spirit to withstand the pain of navigating the web with my charred hands, each key pressed sending a surge of agony down my spine. Over the course of several days, however, I finally reached a source of discussion that hadn't been fully censored by this group, as well as the identities of the most recent victims of their attack. Trapped in the fire alongside me was an elderly community volunteer, a valedictorian studying medicine, and a former officer who risked his safety to become a whistleblower. Below them was my name, face, and occupation, with bold letters underneath it all, saying, "No body found." I collapsed to the floor as I realized how limited my time on this earth was. They already knew, and in prior messages shared between cultists, I saw mention of their perfect record. It was truly an act of divine intervention that I was saved by such an improbable chance. But fury swelled across my face as I was reminded that these monsters were also fueled by their own faith that my unlikely survival now put to the test. I don't know who funds them and how far their outreach goes. I have no idea if their perfect efficiency holds true and if they've survived for centuries like my research showed. Regardless, their exposure is my newfound purpose in the last moments of my life, to send this warning and plead others to watch themselves, because the Morenda Script is out there, constantly watching, punishing those with the most guiltless hearts in the name of their wicked depiction of God. I want the world to burn them all, to have them beg for their lives like we did. I will use the last guaranteed days of my life to expose these vicious parasites to the public, ensuring no one forgets their name and the atrocities they've likely committed across history. I've already written posts about this group online with little success, but only time will tell if my efforts will be noticed. Otherwise, my suffering, that of everyone they've ever captured and that of their future victims, would all be for nothing more than their vile worship. I ask all of you to continue striving to do good. The contents of the script itself instructs its fanatics to seek balance between good and evil as the ultimate depiction of our Creator. But these people are not excused of what they do. These are overzealous, sadistic cultists who justify the pleasure they receive in their mutilations and tortures as signs of worship when in reality, they're taking a gamble in their faith like the rest of us, one that revolves around the anguish of humanity's most compassionate souls. That is a gamble I sincerely wish they face the consequences of when it's time for them to meet their Creator. As I sit here, collapse on the floor in continuous torment, I'm beginning to make peace with my departure from this life, be it by my own hand or when they inevitably find me. If their interpretation of our Creator somehow turns out to be true, I'll have done exactly what these fanatics wanted, because I can't imagine a greater feeling in my soul right now than the unbridled hatred of a being who let a group like this exist for centuries. The thought of it all has me tearing through the grafted skin in my arms in madness, as I could not consciously live with an omnipotent being that allowed all this.